What's up, guys? Hope you all are doing well here. I'm back at the workbench for another project video. This one's going to be a pretty interesting one, and we're going to be talking about a different subject. We've been working on covered hoppers so far, but I want to look at some gondolas now. And the one car that I have to start with is a big project car, and it's one that I'm very surprised not very many people model. And it is a Railgon, a classic Railgon. These are very common prototypes. These are all over the place. Hundreds of these cars in service still today. They have multiple owners now. Many of them are still owned by GONX, the original cars. They still float around. And these are great cars to model because they're really cool. You see them in all kinds of mixed freights. They haul scrap iron, they haul pipes, steel lathing, all kinds of different stuff. So you can use these for just about anything. And again, like I said, they're a really popular car, but I'm just honestly surprised that no one's really come out with weathering tips for these, gone showing modeling one of these cars or anything like that. So I figured I would go ahead and show my attempt at actually making one of these cars, making a better model in general. So I'm going to be talking about what I have here. The car that's before us here is an Athearn model. I'm going to be talking about this a little bit because I've done a couple things to us to kind of change it around a little bit. So the car that I'm looking at here is a Railgon by Athearn. These are getting a little bit harder to find now. But these are honestly, in my opinion, the best models to use to replicate these Railgons, whatever road you choose to model. Now, to get an introduction in this project too, the car I'm going to be modeling is a DJTX Railgon. These are relatively new acquisitions that the David J. Joseph company got. And I think they use these mostly in bulk dirt service. They move contaminated soil and stuff like that. I'm sure they could be hauling scrap now, but a lot of them that I've seen personally have hauled dirt, and I really wanted to model one of these cars. But the Athearn car, in my opinion, is the best to use for a starting point for this model, for the fact that it is relatively affordable. It's, you know, a pretty good model overall. The roundhouse car is the base for this model, and Athearn's gone back and you can see they've added some nice separately applied details like the separately applied grab irons, and they've overall refined a few little details and stuff, and then usually the artwork is pretty good on these cars too overall. Now I'm choosing Athearn models to pick overall because, for one thing, there's really not any other models of these cars available. Obviously, if you can get the old roundhouse kits, those are good, but they require a lot more upfront detailing, and you got to strip out and do a lot of re-detailing if you want to get a good model. Now, there is also the Arrowhead models gondola, but honestly, forget that because they're hard to find now. They came out, they only did small batches of them. They're like $60 a car, screw that, and they're pretty much mostly brass, so you can't do a lot of the heavy weathering on the sides. If you watched NS Modeler 24's video when he got one of those and tried to weather the cars, he actually damaged the car sides on his, and it honestly looked pretty bad, so I'm going to avoid those at all costs. So with this case, I just opted, like I said, to use the Athearn car because it's a good starting point and they're very easy to detail, take things off, repaint, whatever you need to do to them. So in this case, I've used an Athearn C&O patch out gondola. Now, again, the Athearn models are good, but there's some things you got to refine on these. And what I started to do here was fix the top cords because the top cords on the stock car are not thick enough. They need to be a little bit longer and a little bit wider, especially on the ends. There's a noticeable difference compared to what's on the model. If you actually look, you can see that they're really thick, and I've actually modified these. And what that is, it is angled channel 0.80 inch here. There's the size that you need if you want to get this for this project. So I got a couple strips of that, cut it to size, and that became my new top cord. I then just glued everything in place, fitted it all together, and then sanded the ends nice and smooth so there's nice smooth even transitions. Basic underbody piping to enhance the detail on this model overall. So I got the basic brake rigging, basic brake plumbing and detailing. If you actually look at the underbody, you can see that brake detailing. It looks pretty good. It's pretty acceptable. It's not an award-winning job, but it's just to have the details that should be there at least. On the ends, I added the coupler lift bars, the new couplers, and the air hose, and then the new guard plate on the end as well. So those are just some of the details, and I also added the new derailment pad there. These are basically something they can hook a chain up to, I guess, and they can move the car if they need to. That's something you see on a lot of cars. A lot of even the newer ones still have those. So anyways, yeah, that's all the details I've added to this. So it's a lot more detailed now. So what I'm going to basically do is, the first thing to start the actual weathering process on this car is I need to warp out these sides, and I'm going to be using my blowtorch technique with a couple paper towels soaked in water, and I'm going to be using some various tools to help just kind of bend the sides out very carefully on this car. Obviously, we got a lot of details here I don't want to damage. I don't want to mess something up and then, you know, regret it, because these are kind of hard to find at this point. and I don't want to trash a model if I can help it. But there's a way you can do this, obviously, where you're not going to damage anything. So if you guys want to see how I actually bend the sides out on these gondolas, refer to my last video on gondola weathering where I actually show how to bulge the panels out. But that's going to basically be the first thing I'm going to tackle on this car before we begin the actual weathering process. So I'm going to do that real quick and we'll come back. So the car I'm going to be using for this project to model this particular prototype is a Athearn Railgon. These are the more modern, upgraded versions from the RTR line. These are the old roundhouse molds that have been completely refined. They've added some new details. They have the separately applied grab irons now, which is really nice. There's a couple things that I had to do. Basic detail modifications and revisions by me. I added the brake piping and plumbing underneath, the brake chains and everything. Couple of lift bars, I added air hoses, I added the new end plates, a new chain detail, a new brake wheel, and all that good stuff. And then I also added the little jacking pads that the prototypes have, as you can see on the sides. And then the other big revision to this car was modifying the top cord. As you can see, I've added some styrene channel here, and what this is 292 styrene channel here, this size here, to basically thicken up this top cord, because they're a lot thicker on these prototypes than what is molded on this model. So I had to modify that by adding the channel, but the model's pretty much prepped and ready to go. This was a couple hours of detailing by me. And again, the prototype I'm going to be modeling is a DJTX patched Railgon. It's a former CSX car. So I'm going to modify this artwork a little bit, but the first thing that I actually got to do for the weathering of this car is warp and bend out the side panels between the ribs. A lot of these gondolas have very severely bowed side panels, and if you want to see how you can actually model these, you can refer to my last video on gondola weathering, where I actually took an Atlas car and I warped the side panels out on it. And it's a very effective technique. You basically take wet paper towels, put them inside, and then work around each rib with a torch and whatever tool you want, whether it's some tweezers, a hobby knife, a pick, even a screwdriver will work too, and you just basically very gently warp the panel out, very gently. It's a very effective technique for doing this, and you don't have to completely repanel the sides. So that's what I'm going to do to this now, is take care of that, and then we'll come back and we'll actually start the weathering on this car, which is the part you guys really want to see. So now that I got the gouges done on the side of the car, I want to go ahead and start painting over some of these old reporting marks and patchwork on the side. This particular car was a model of a C&O gun where they patched up the old Railgon logo and replaced it with the C&O patches and stuff. I don't need this particular patchwork for this car, so I'm just going to take a brush that I've mixed in with a little bit of light gray and black to create this close match to the stock car body color to paint over this lettering, and also to kind of cover up some of the bare plastic where we did a little bit of the panel warping and stuff. I want to basically blend this all back together and make it nice and flat for when I go in and start doing all the washes and further weathering effects. Okay, jumping ahead a little bit, you can see I just started to do the Railgon logo on the side and then the Nationwide Gondola Pool lettering. The particular car I'm modeling has pretty well weathered, and the lettering is pretty well peeled off. There's a DJTX patch here, and then a lot of this lettering is eaten up by rust, but I still need the lettering there to represent some of the graphic that's still on the car. I'm using again this photo of DJTX 318264. There's the number. Notice the patching, the black patching on the side, the yellow patching here. And if we move down, you'll actually see the lettering I'm talking about. You can see there's imprints of the lettering. There's lettering that's still intact. Patched up lettering where the DJ logo is. More patched up lettering. And then you can actually still see the railcar pool, but it's completely rusted up, and I'm going to try to replicate that now. Again, just refer to prototype photos on whatever car you're modeling, because there's a lot of variations of this lettering. Some cars don't even have the lettering at all anymore. It's been painted over. Some cars have all rust lettering. Oops, sorry about that. And some cars have the intact lettering, but it's all rusted over, but relatively light compared to this. This is more of like a graphic imprint where the lettering's peeled off and it's just rusted completely in that area. So that's what I'm going to try to replicate next year. So to actually do this lettering, I'm going to basically take some acrylic to start, and I'm going to shade in some of these letters with acrylic first, and then I'll go back and add oils to these. Now the reason I'm doing the acrylic first is because this will provide some shading for the oil, so I won't have to apply as much oil as if I were to just take straight oil to this lettering, because the problem is If you were just to take straight oil, you wouldn't be able to get a rich, deep color transition very quickly. Oils don't like to build up very thick very quickly. You have to apply them in various layers. This is basically to help speed up the process and basically give a backing for the oils to give me a much richer, darker rust color. So I'm only going to be doing this again for a few of these letters, just here and there. And I'm going to vary this up between both sides because I'm using two different pictures. I don't have a single set of pictures for one car, so I'm using two, but I like the weathering effects between these letters, so I'm going to just kind of bounce these back and forth. The small letters, we're going to do basically the same technique too. So these guys here, but I'm going to be using a finer brush to basically go in and just stencil these in with the acrylic and then the oil. And I'll show you guys what that looks like when we come back. Here's what that lettering looks like after I've painted the oil and acrylic work onto the lettering. It helps to really subdue the lettering quite a bit, and it looks a lot more like the prototype with that rusty lettering. Again, there's a lot of different variations with this lettering, so again, kind of refer to your prototype photos if you're going to try a car like this to try to replicate the lettering as best you can. But in this case, I'm pretty happy with it, and I think it does pretty closely match the prototype in a lot of respects here, so I'm pretty happy with that. This side has the full lettering on there, so you can really see that. Of course, this will all get much more blended in too once we add the initial washes and then start laying on the more of the oil and powder work to the sides to enhance these gouges and scratches. Again, there's that lettering there, so it all looks pretty good. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the interior of the car with acrylic. That'll provide a base for the oil paint, which I'm going to apply, and I'm going to be doing a pretty heavy layer of oil on the interior. Later on, we'll add chalks and oils and stuff, or chalks and powders. But for now, that's what I'm looking at next. The other decals we got to add are the DJTX patches, some extra car data, the lube stencils, and then the DJTX logos. And I'm going to show you guys these real quick. This is a decal sheet I just got. They just were made by Circuit City Decals. I sent them an image of the modern DJJ Nuker logo, plus this version as well, and he printed off this big sheet for me, as you can see, for 60 bucks, which is pretty sweet. So I got enough to do quite a few cars plus extras. So I'll be using those decals for this, so I think it'll look really good. But we got a lot of work to do, so we can. So we're going to go ahead and start painting this interior up, and the colors I'm using are Anita's Earth Brown and Anita's Flat Black. These two colors alone can give you a multitude of different effects. I use it on lots of different stuff, like rust spots, rust patches, coupler work, truck work, painting wheels, that kind of thing. So I'm just taking these two colors, and I got the caps basically on my work paper here in the corner that you kind of can't see. And I'm just taking this color, if you can look in the very bottom corner, and I'm just loading up my bristles with a very, very heavy amount of this paint. And I'm going with a pretty dark color this time around, pretty dark earth tone. And I'm just going to grab the car body like this, and we're going to start in this corner here. And with the panels kind of bulged out, it can be a little bit trickier to do this, but you basically just scrub the paint in these areas like this, get everything filled in, and then work the paint upwards with the vertical brush strokes that I always talk about, and this will give you the color that you need as a base. We're going to be enhancing this with oils later. I'm not going to be worrying too much about this interior again though, because I'm going to be putting a load in it that'll be coming up mostly to the top quarter of this car, so it's going to be covering it up. But we still need to have this mostly covered up because we don't want to obviously have any bare unpainted spots on this gondola, because it's going to make it look very toy-like. So this is a good little way of getting a quick color result and getting it all transitioned over for later weathering effects, is using these acrylics and a large brush to do this. So I'm just going to repeat this process for the entire interior, including this floor panel. With the acrylic dry, I'm going to go ahead and add the oil to the interior, and I'm using a large brush here, about a, what is this? This is a 1/2 inch brush, and these are great for doing these interiors because they cover really well. Again, get a firm grip on your gondola like this, and then just take that brush and just kind of scrub that paint into those nooks and crannies that we've created from the panel warping. And then once you've gotten all those coated, just go in and just brush the paint vertical upwards like this. Again, I'm not worrying about the floor because that's going to be covered up by a false load. I'm also doing this on the end sheets as well. Alright, so now that we got most of the interior finished up for now, I want to go ahead and start working on these sides a little bit. Now, I'm going to be tackling this project in a different kind of way than I normally would. With the railguns, the sides, the black part of the car, weather's way different than what you see on the yellow parts of the car. The yellow parts get a rusty wash. A lot of times there's a lot of weird patching. Most of the time it's eaten up by rust patches and stuff. And there's a lot more streaks and stuff that come down from these panels over the yellow that are visible. The yellow helps to kind of serve as a background to enhance those rust streaks and stuff, so you see them a lot more prominently than you do on the sides. On the panels themselves, there's more over gouges and streaks across these panels from the basically from the dents and dings on the side. So we're going to be doing it in two different steps, but again I'm going to be focusing on modeling the rust work on the yellow parts of this car first, including the ends. On our prototype car here, you can see on these yellow parts here how the rust kind of builds up. You can see there's darker patches of rust, especially on the ends where these panels warp out. The paint usually will peel off because when these cars were painted, the black was painted first and then the yellow is just added over that. So the yellow has a tendency to just kind of peel off first. And you can see on the ends it's especially heavy. A lot of that is chipped off. There's a lot of shade, basically shadowing. Lots of rust, so I'm going to try to replicate that first on my model, and the base effect is basically going in and adding a darker color. So I'll go in, I'll add maybe some little bit of black, I might add a little bit of earth brown and stuff. You'll kind of see how I vary this color up, but I'm basically going to start with some black here and there to start doing these heavier patches of the chipping. I'm going to take this paint straight from the cap, as you can see, so it's full strength, and I'm using a fine tip brush. And basically what I like to do is I just come in here and I kind of start painting some of these random little dots, these heavier little backing colors for where I'll start running the rust down. And I'll basically start working in that area where I basically want to shade all this in and have it so that it looks like all the paint is peeled off. I'll just start kind of painting that in. I might leave some little hints of paint here and there just for some color detail, just for fun, and then everything else I'll just kind of peel away at like this. And again, I'll just kind of vary this up. I'm using the prototype reference again here in that photo to get ideas of where everything kind of lines up, and then I just lay in a bunch of smaller dots and stuff here and there as I go along. You can see in the corner here where I painted that dark black, it helps to look like chip paint, and then there's a little patch of discoloration I did. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of earth brown and black mixed together in my brush, and I'm just going to basically paint in some discoloration spots and stuff like that. The heavier rust chips that I'm going to bring the oils down from in these little areas, like on these ribs for example. Just little areas like that to help give that discoloration effect. So I'll just do this down that entire side of this car basically. As you can see, the sides are now painted with that acrylic work and it looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is add some oil paint, full strength. This is basically some burnt umber. I'm going to apply this to certain patches of rust here, and I'm just going to do it like this. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to build this up in certain layers. And this is basically oil rendering work. This is very popular. This is a great technique to do all kinds of rust spots, streaks, and things, just like what you see on these railguns. And coming in for a close-up here, I got my large fan brush here, long tip, dipped in thinner, and I'm basically going to take and I'm going to pull this paint down with a wet brush, and I'm going to streak it down just like this. Notice how it creates all those streaks naturally for us. We don't really have to work too hard at this. It does all the work for us, and we can get some great streaking effects. This of course will look a lot better once all this oil dilutes and you can see all the fine streaks. But basically I'm going to repeat this process in multiple layers and include some fine tip brush streaking in heavier rust pots, basically to create all the streaking effects that you see on the yellow. Alright, here's the car now. I just got the sides completed, and this took about 2 hours to just kind of even everything out and then layer it very slowly, and you can see we got some really good results. If we start in the corner here, you can see it really is starting to look a lot like the prototype. Again, note that we have not really done too much to the sides yet. Those are going to come in the next phase, but right now everything's really starting to take shape. That yellow looks really good. I'm real happy with that. It's coming along pretty nice. On the opposite side, it's a little bit more tied together. So I'm pretty happy with everything so far, as you can see. And I've also done the ends. If we actually look, the ends are very rusty on these cars, and they get a lot of that pitting too. So I went ahead and did that. I'm not really getting a... There we go. You can kind of see the amount of scratching and pitting in that interior. So I just did all that. I did some patchwork up here too and rusted over that. So I'm also going to be working on this top cord. I got to start getting this top cord painted. And then basically my idea here, once we get all the weathering on the sides done, we can basically finish the decaling, and then we'll be able to seal it in, and we'll get our powder work done, and then we'll work about making an interior load for this particular car. So I'm getting pretty excited now.